Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. Hey everybody, this is Chris Crazy House, and I'd like to welcome you again to another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. And today we are going to be looking at Youngblood Strike File, and I'm going to do this in 3 parts, so be prepared for that. I'm going to be doing the Diehard story in Youngblood Strike File, which started out with Youngblood Strike File number 1. Now, for those who know, and those who were comic collectors back during the early 90s, I believe this came out in 1993, this is a 2-part book. So like it has half a story of Die Hard and the other half is Chapel. We're going to start with the Die Hard, but I will be doing the Chapel story next. Okay, and I'll do those in 3 parts as well. But we're going to be starting with the Die Hard story, and Die Hard is a character that was created by Rob Liefeld from the team Youngblood. And this is, Strike File was kind of his idea to showcase individual characters from the team Youngblood and just have them in their own individual stories. And he decided to illustrate the very first story. And I remember very well when this story was advertised in a lot of the other Image books, and it created a lot of hype, at least for me anyway, because Die Hard was my favorite character from the team of Youngblood, and I really wanted to see a solo story with him in it. And I was actually surprised that Rob was going to actually do the illustrations for the story. Now, we're going to be analyzing this. It's not a lot of pages, and there's not a lot of story, okay? The story and the plot is extremely simple. But what I wanted to analyze mostly was the art, the composition of not just the characters, but also the composition of how the panels are done, because I think this is very helpful for young illustrators out there. And just kind of looking at Rob Liefeld's art and composition and plotting back when I believe he was at kind of like his height as far as like this style of drawing. So we're going to be looking at this and starting out with the cover, with basically it's just a basic picture of Die Hard flying through space. There really is no, there's no indication of what the story might be, but we have the character of Die Hard flying through space, and that's not what the story is about, not at all, actually, but it's, I guess, enough to get young people hyped, people who enjoyed the character, people who were 12 or 13 years old back then. So we were all happy to see this character in a solo story. So we were definitely jumping on this book. And even though this is a very basic cover, it gets you hype enough to want to open it up and take a look inside. So let's take a look. And what you'll notice is at this time in comics, we are in the digital coloring age. So when you look even here at the colors, we have Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics helping out with the colors, and the paper quality is a lot better. This is not newsprint anymore. This is actually printed on a nice stock of like glossy paper, and it looks really good. And you can see that it's actually helped because I bought this first edition back during 93, and it still looks great. There's no real fading to it at all. You know, the colors still pop just as much as they did when I first bought the book. So kicking off with the story, as simple as it is, we're kicking off right in the heart of a flashback to the World War II era Die Hard, and we're back in World War II fighting against the Nazis, and we see that Die Hard was actually a member of a team called the Allies. So it's Die Hard, Super Patriot, and Glory. So this is what we're going to be concentrating on mostly in this story. And when I say there's a lot of money shots and lots of just plain splash pages, that's what I mean in this, okay? So there's lots of action in these 3 stories that we're going to be looking at, but this one in particular is damn near all splash pages. And I guess it seemed like to me like Rob Liefeld basically just illustrated an action sequence and they kind of put some words to it later on. I guess he might have had a basic plot or maybe a basic outline, but for the most part, this is all just action in this, and you can almost just write any words to it if you think about it. But we got so this is, I guess you would call him a Silver Age or Golden Age version of Die Hard. Instead of like the basic mask that he always wears, he has more like a Cobra Commander type mask, and he has more like, belts and gear that you would see on like Captain America, and I guess he's more like a Captain America type character back then. And we got, Glory is kind of like a very Wonder Woman-like, and Super Patriot is very much kind of like their version of Superman back then. So we got the big double splash page. We jump from one splash page to the next. And this one is actually pretty good. Now, here's the weird part for me, and I'm going to make some commentaries on some of the character designs in this. And that is the fact that this version of Die Hard, he has like a Cobra Commander mask that basically, I guess, attaches to this mask. So basically, like when this mask flops over, he still has another mask underneath it. That seems kind of redundant and a little silly, but I don't know. I guess somehow it works. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really make much sense. I don't know if Rob was just trying to figure out a way to illustrate, or couldn't figure out a way to illustrate that, floppy mask on this character. But to me, this is kind of silly having one mask on another. But I mean, we got pouches on top of pouches as well, so why not, right? But a great shot as far as introducing the action of these characters. And, even though I think the angle is a little bit off as far as like these Nazis kind of looking up and they're kind of going off to the, or in more of like a profile shot, you would think like there'd be more, the Nazis themselves would be more in like a profile view, but they're not. So it's a little bit off-putting in that regard, but it still looks great. Like I said, the colors still look amazing from back then. And they had done a lot of experimenting with the digital colors back then. And I think at this point, we finally got to a point where it looks great. And it still looks good even today. So like I said, this is all basically just the Allies beating up Nazis, which, I know no one has a problem with. But we're just going to be analyzing how some of the panel work looks here. So as we kind of break down the story a little bit, and I believe it's actually Glory, she's kind of reminiscing. So it's her flashback talking about the Golden Age, Die Hard, and Super Patriot. And we see like Die Hard jumping in the middle of a bunch of Nazis right here, beating them up, and Glory kind of batting them away. And this is one of the really cool splash pages that I like, and I'll explain why. In that you got Super Patriot beating up a Nazi soldier. The soldier's kind of flying out of the panel, kind of like we saw when Rob Liefeld worked on X-Force. But if you notice here, you'll see Super Patriot's cape kind of go around like this, and like this, and it comes down, and it actually forms the panel for this bottom section here with Die Hard throwing his shield. I thought that was really creative, and I think that it looks cool. This is something I wouldn't recommend doing all the time, but when you can pull off a fun panel like this, like I would love to own this page if I could find it. Like I'm sure someone's bought it and someone owns it already, but this would be definitely a cool page to own if you own this original artwork. And I recall Todd McFarlane used to do this a lot with Spawn's cape. So he would use Spawnscape and have it flopping around in the page, and usually as actually a covering for a panel. So I'm thinking that's where Rob Liefeld probably got it from, was, you know, because him and Todd McFarlane were somewhat tight back then. I know their relationship started to crumble after this, but back then they were cool, so they used to borrow a lot from each other. Once again, very good action sequence, and it actually works well with the composition of, you know, this character being knocked out of the panel almost, and it almost kind of acts as a border as well for your main character. And then you have Diehard throwing his shield, which was very plain. I don't know why they never did any more design on it than that, but I guess they didn't want to be too close to Captain America. And, you know, this is an odd panel, and I think it's supposed to be the end result of him throwing his shield. I'm assuming is that that's what happens. So these Nazis are kind of flying all around. You would think they would have the shield in there somewhere to showcase that that's what's happening. There's not just people exploding out of the panel, because otherwise this looks like a very weird situation here with just bodies flying all over the place. Even when you're telling a story, and I know it's going from one page to another, you still want to make sure you have some continuity within your panel work. This is a very popular ad that was going on back then for Deathmate Red, where they were going to team up Youngblood and Bloodshot. This blood's for you. So very popular ad back then. I do like this poster. You know, if not for nothing else, just 90s nostalgia. this screams early 90s. You know, that's what it almost like it looks like. They're actually screaming at you. 90s comic books. They're screaming it at you as they're shooting at you. But yeah, I remember this, and maybe one day we'll review it. I still do own Deathmate Red, even though it's one of the weirdest books I've ever read in my life. It's actually pretty funny, so maybe we will do it as like a comedy special or something like that. But getting back to the action, this is very much a Jack Kirby type pose of Diehard using his shield to beat up some guys and kind of jumping forward at them. Jack Kirby and, you know, some of the other, you know, early Captain America artists used to do the same thing, where he was jumping out with his shield like that. Another very well done panel of Super Patriot punching some Nazis, and once again using that body as like a border as he's kind of flying outward. I think we get another splash page here. Yep, another double splash page of Diehard. Once again, very reminiscent of what Jack Kirby used to do with a lot of his action panels, not just Captain America, but other characters like the Black Panther and others like that, where he's jumping forward and just kicking into a bunch of soldiers here. I love stuff like this. This is like classic comic book panel work done in like a new age type way. And I can tell that Rob Liefeld was very much a student and also a fan of those classic comics. The fact that he would even do something like this. This is classic comic book action right here. And I love it. And, you know, they use the sound effects here. You see the broken up type panels kind of going around. This is very popular during the early 90s, where you're not just using straight panels. You do experiments with, you know, how you do your paneling. And, you know, you have Glory and Super Patriot kind of reacting to just how enthusiastic Diehard is to whooping these Nazis' asses. they just remark on how much he seems to be enjoying himself whooping ass here. Now, this is a weird panel, or a weird page, I should say. It's not just a panel, it's a whole page. But it's well drawn, but I'm wondering why they decided to fade the colors like this to make it look kind of blue, because it almost looks like they're fighting at nighttime now. And it's supposed to be all within the same time period and the same storyline going, you know. I know this is a character reminiscing, but this would work if you were telling like a modern story and this was the flashback. So you would do the flashback in different colors, but keep the modern story in just the regular colors. This kind of looks weird when it's just in the middle of the same story. And I guess they're just trying to go for something different. Maybe the color people were flexing, but it looks, the action looks good. I do like the composition of Diehard jumping down, Super Patriot in the foreground, and Glory in the background beating up Nazis. Actually, a good pose of Glory and Super Patriot holding up a tank. And I will say, like, the cape, Rob has never been the best at drawing capes. I did like the way the cape was used as the panels in the earlier shot, but this is not the best cape in my opinion. Like, this looks like something that looks like I could draw like this back then, so I maybe that's why I liked it back then, but now it kind of looks not as smooth of a drapery as it probably should be. I mean, it looks okay here because it is a comic book, but otherwise I think it would be, someone else could do better drapery than that, make it look a little bit more realistic. So we see the team of the Allies regrouping, and we see this big shot, money shot of them all kind of standing together, and we're fading back into the present day. Now, I thought this could have been done a little bit better as far as, like, if we're going to be fading back into modern times. I know what they're trying to get the ideas is like these classic heroes are larger than life, standing in the sunshine, very classic posing. It might have been even cool, since this shield is so blank, to have this panel within the shield and maybe have his shield a little lower, but I don't know how that will work. You would have to figure that out. But we're getting back to modern times, and we know that it's the character of Glory retelling the story of the Allies, and we're kind of getting a shot of here. She was telling it to Shaft and the current Diehard of Youngblood, and smoking very heavily, by the way. This is another Todd McFarlane technique with using so much swirling smoke going around here. I don't know, human being smokes like that. I guess nowadays with the vape pipes, now you can get smoke like that, but back then just a cigarette's not going to be giving you that much smoke realistically. But this was a style choice for back then. So here's the critique I'll give you for these pages here, and the fact that, so it seems like with all the other pages, Rob had his fun as far as retelling the story of the Allies fighting the Nazis. And now all of a sudden, in the last 2 pages of the story, he dumps all of this exposition on us. Like, I remember turning to this page when I was younger and just saying, good God, that's a lot of dialogue. Like, he literally just threw it all towards the end of the story. And in my opinion, I guess you can get away with that, but just for aesthetic purposes, I don't think you should be throwing this much dialogue on someone just within 2 pages, especially when it's kind of getting across the main point of what your story is. So basically, the whole front part of this story was all action and money shots, and then all of a sudden on 2 pages and within 3 panels, you throw the exposition of what the story is. And the story is that Super Patriot has been kidnapped by this evil corporation called Cyberdata, and Glory has come to Youngblood to ask for their assistance in rescuing him, because they've taken Super Patriot and turned him into a cyborg. Now, if you read the Savage Dragon comic books, you know that Super Patriot was attacked by the evil criminal mutants and thugs in Savage Dragon, and that's how his body got torn up, kind of like Murphy in the RoboCop movies. And they've basically turned Super Patriot into a super cyborg and taken over his mind. And Glory basically is sending in Diehard to go rescue him. I don't know why she doesn't do it, but, you know, I guess this is supposed to be a Diehard story, not a Glory story. And I guess this is actually not a bad perspective shot, like a downward perspective shot, that, you know, this is something that Rob Liefeld doesn't normally do, where characters just sitting there like this, but it actually comes off pretty competent. You know, I'll say that. I'll give him that. And, you know, I guess this is Diehard flexing hard here, looking like he's ready for action. Like, when you're having a conversation with somebody that's sitting at a table, is this how you talk to them? You know, but this is made for, like I said, young kids. There's going to be lots of money shots. This page was probably sold for a lot of money, but, you know, who talks like this? But I guess, you know, it's done in classic action hero style, but realistically, it's just funny that someone would be talking like this, like they're about to beat you up when you're sitting there talking to them. and he's basically swearing that he's going to do everything in his power to go rescue Super Patriot from this evil corporation. So that is the end of this particular story, or at least this part of the story, and we're going to get into part 2 in the next episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, so make sure you're here for that. But before we go, I wanted to show you one more thing that pertains to this story. That is the Glory pinup shot. Yes. So, you know, this was also something very popular back in the 90s, not just big action with men, but you had to have sexy ladies. And I guess this is supposed to be the classic version of Glory. So this is her retro style, where she's kind of more like Wonder Woman. And they did a pinup shot for you. So this is something good for the young boys as well. Now, I've actually become a fan of Glory over the years, and I'll explain why. Not because of this, but because of books like this. So not only with the work that people like Alan Moore and others did with the character, I think they did way more with it than Rob Liefeld could ever do story-wise. But this book in particular is what made me a Glory fan. And, you know, she went from this basically to this. You know, this book is badass. And one day we will do this book on Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, because it, you know, it does get into some very violent moments, and it actually has a pretty tragic ending when we get to the last part of the story arc. But, you know, this made me a Glory fan, and it also made me a fan of Ross Campbell, who is now Sophia Campbell, and I'll let you figure out why the name changed. But yeah, big fan of this artist and big fan of the character of Glory. This is what Glory was, and she became something completely different later on. But this is her humble beginnings. She was just basically Wonder Woman, superpowered eye candy back then, but she actually became more of her own character later on, which I do appreciate. So that is the end of Youngblood Strike File number 1, the Diehard story. You can let me know in the comments what you think of it, and let me know if you were a collector of these books back then and what you thought of the artwork. We are going to be analyzing more of it with part 2 and part 3 in the next few episodes. So make sure you stick around for Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, and make sure you like this video. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you're here for the next time we upload, and make sure you go ahead and share this with anyone that will enjoy these classic reviews of these classic comics. Anyway, folks, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.